in this episode.
Let's fast forward to Chalmers and the hard problem. Okay, what Chalmers did is basically misstate, in my opinion, the hard problem. He misguided us. He put the problem entirely in terms of qualia. How how do we see the qualia, the blue qualia of the cup, and the steam coming out, the steamy qualia, and the brown of the tea here, and etc. How do we explain how it feels like something? He used that phraseology still in 1995. How do I explain like feels like something? Well, Bergson understood the hard problem very well in 1896, way before Chalmers. 100 years before Chalmers, he understood the hard problem. And the, the better way to put the hard problem, or general way, is how do we explain the origin of the image of the external world? Remember, you've got nothing in the brain that looks like the coffee cup. You don't have the qualia, you don't have the cup, you don't have the form. And so the problem is everything in the image of the cup is qualia. There's nothing that's not qualia. Even the form I could show you ultimately is qualitative, even though the computer mind likes, guys like to think, well, form is just very geometric and we can easily compute it, and we can account for the form, except for a minor problem that it's got to be either a gray form or a black form. Still going to have some color, you know. We're back to quality anyhow in a way, but nevertheless, they somehow think they can explain form, but they can't. But the truth is, no, form is not as any more computable than the blue of the cup or any other piece of the qualia. So, in other words, the more general form of the heart problem is explaining the origin of the image of the external world.
Hey everyone, welcome to my conversation with the AI, cognitive science, and philosophy of mind researcher Stephen E. Robbins. I think it's fair to say that Stephen does most of his independent research primarily through the lens of Henri Bergson, and in fact, the way we got connected was through him reaching out to me probably a couple of months ago last year. I think after the conversation I had with Mel Andrews on the philosophy of machine learning, and he sent this very interesting email saying that Henri Bergson's thought, the French philosopher Henri Bergson's thought, is a lot more pertinent to theorizing philosophically and metaphysically on AI research over someone like Heidegger from continental philosophy. And at the time, I just didn't have the capacity to entertain the ideas of another philosopher. Even though I've heard of Bergson before, I virtually knew nothing about him apart from the now, I guess, infamous debate he had with Einstein on the philosophy of time. And so I told him, give me a few months, I'll prepare, I'll go through a few of Stephen's lectures, and then we could probably potentially do a podcast together. And oh boy, I sure am glad it happened. It's been, I would say, a few months in the making. And now really my primary source for all things Henri Bergson is Stephen and his great lecture series on his YouTube channel. And I'd say from a podcasting perspective, I really hope this is the first of many conversations that I'll be having on the work of Bergson, especially recently thanks to Christopher and his interview with Emily Herring on his channel, The Young Idealists. I just ordered Emily's book on Henri Bergson, and I really want to chat with Emily about Bergson too, because she just is a very lovely storyteller in explicating kind of the life and work of this huge French philosopher, Henri Bergson, which, yes, surprisingly was forgotten for a while, but I think he is making a bit of a comeback with a lot of the online philosophy taking place right now. In any case, the point being, I feel super grateful to speak to people like Stephen who've spent years and years deeply studying the thought and works of someone like Bergson. And I should mention this on the note, in fact, Stephen just is meticulous in his presentations. So along those lines, I don't really like doing this, but I would probably suggest you watch this episode over listening to it because when Stephen was discussing certain ideas, especially the holographic theory of mind and its pertinence to AI, I'll be putting a lot of overlays of some of the diagrams he's referring to, because if not, I think it's just a bit hard to conceptualize what he's talking about, and the visual diagrams and graphics certainly do help to grasp the concepts. And not that I fully get it yet, but certainly the stuff is put together. It's a great resource, so it really aids in understanding the metaphysical framework Bergsonians present, apropos philosophy of mind and even reality as such. Be that as it may, before we get to the formal introduction, a quick PSA. As you may know, I've mentioned multiple times I'll never have advertisers or sponsors on this podcast. Frankly, I think we live in a society of excess and overconsumption, and I don't want to contribute to that by selling you more things. That being said, though, forgive me for the tautology. We, for better or worse, live in the world we live in. I run this podcast on top of doing a full-time job while doing my master's, and if I am to sustain this project, I need some kind of financial backing. So if you have the means, please do consider financially supporting this podcast through Patreon, Substack, or PayPal. All the links will be in the show notes. And if you're wondering, what are the perks? What are you going to get? The honest answer is nothing. That's right, there's no exclusive behind the paywall perks. You're simply supporting this project if you think the already free content that's publicly available is of any value to you. I sincerely do want to thank the existing supporters on Patreon, Substack, and even PayPal. However, if you're considering supporting the project, please do so only if you have the means. All right, back to the episode. Dr. Stephen E. Robbins researches AI, cognitive science, psychology, and the philosophy of mind. He holds a PhD in cognitive psychology, minoring in computer science with a thesis on Bergson's model of mind versus the computational model of mind. He's also a former university professor specializing in perception and cognition, a military veteran, and spent many years in the tech industry as a software architect and project manager. Dr. Robbins is the author of numerous books and papers, the latest being The Challenge to AI, Consciousness, and Ecological General Intelligence. And yes, to emphasize, do consider reading Stephen's book, The Challenge to AI. It's an excellent resource in understanding this Bergson's holographic theory of mind, and really I'm thankful to Stephen for almost making this podcast like a masterclass on this specific theory of mind by Bergson, and I really hope we manage to get across some of the ideas to a person who's a complete neophyte to the world of Bergsonian thinking, let's say. But with all that being said, without further ado, here's my conversation with Stephen E. Robbins.
I moved to about 3 different places ultimately. I ended up in Milwaukee with this large firm called FIS, Fidelity, but they weren't called that before I got there. But they hired me to be a technical lead on this loan system, and the loan system had like 5 million lines of COBOL code. Okay, and I was there to put a graphical interface on it, lead a project to put a graphical face. But I remember talking to this technician, very brilliant guy, and I said, "Well, how long does it take to change one line on the system? How much system? I mean, how much system experience do you need?" He said, "Oh, like 10 years." It was like, before you dare change a line, because the implications went everywhere.
And I don't think he was. I don't think that was hyperbole. I think he was literally stating a fact. Yeah. Oh man. I mean, look. Maybe one day in life, I don't know, when I've got a bit more time, hopefully, I would love to like touch low level, assembly level languages, because there's, I always kind of romanticize programming, and which is why it's quite disheartening when I see people who aren't in tech or IT or programming just blatantly make claims like, "Oh, AI is gonna take over programmers." I mean, people don't understand what programming entails. It's not just blindly, dumbly parroting off lines of code on a computer, and there's something deeply creative in it. But for that, you need to do it to see it. It's like even if we say it, it's just you gotta be involved in the game to understand it. But Be that as it may, Stephen, firstly, thank you very much for reaching out a couple of months ago. I was really happy you did, especially after I started listening to your lectures. Not gonna lie, Henry Bergson, I know virtually nothing about him. In fact, I would say everything I've learned about him, I've learned through you and your lectures. I don't know if you're familiar. Do you know this philosopher called Emily Herring? She just recently released a book on Henry Bergson called Herald of a Restless World. Are you familiar with this philosopher?
I haven't read the book. I know that it exists, and I'm familiar with Emily Herring. Um, I know she was editing the little online journal called Bergsoniana, which publishes Bergson stuff, and I had some interaction with her, and that's sort of the sum of my story there. but
Yeah, because
but
I was, I mean, it's in Australia. It's not released yet, but I've pre-ordered it, and I'm hoping to give it a read, especially after just like, obviously, I skimmed through your book. I couldn't read the whole thing, the Challenge to AI book, and I was like, oh, this guy has some very interesting
right,
ideas, and I
right.
just,
She
yeah,
she comes from. I'm going to say this, and I may be wrong. It's just I'll say my perception. And she's associated with a group in France um, that, if you notice, I will not be referenced in that book. Okay, uh, I don't think they like my take on Bergson. So, for a couple of different dimensions, I'm just kind of thinking they don't like the holographic take, and they don't like my take that Bergson was correct and Einstein was wrong in the debate. so
interesting.
uh, they tend to feature articles that say, in the latter discussion of Bergson versus Einstein, that, well, Bergson should have said this, and Bergson was wrong here, and Einstein was right, but Bergson's okay because he emphasized experience time, and that was okay. And in other words, they don't understand that, in my opinion, the debate,
Yeah,
and
well,
they don't like the actual model. I think that you need for Bergson to be understood. That's the problem. So they
interesting.
tend to write always in terms of a kind of style that's really just repeating Bergson, but maybe glossing on it a bit, but not explicating it. So that, but
Interesting. Yeah, because I mean, I
anyhow,
don't know about the minutiae of the Bergsonian theory. No, I mean, I'm just a complete neophyte on this. However, I do like that the biography she wrote on Bergson, it seems to be really doing well in terms of the public being aware of this big thinker. And
does it?
she was talking about how there was a time where Bergson was really the star philosopher in France, and
Right,
sell out lectures and
right.
well,
She's
I think
she's great on that history. Yeah,
yeah, in terms of like to put it crudely or crassly, marketing and PR for Henry Bergson and Bergsonian theory. But regardless, I was just the point I was trying to make was that yeah, I mean, again, this is like there's ongoing work, and I'm glad to see there's some growing interest in Bergson's work.
hmm
But Stephen, look, I think I said enough. I would like to firstly start off by asking, firstly, thank you for reviewing the questions. But well, so for a listener who, as I mentioned, like myself, have no idea who the hell this Bergson guy is or what his ideas are, people are probably aware of the debate he had with Einstein. If you could just tell us a bit about the life and work of Henry Bergson, the philosopher, the thinker, but also, I mean, obviously, you can't go through all of it in one conversation, but also along with that, maybe on a slight biographical note, if you could mention how you got interested in the work of Henry Bergson.
um, you want to start with the latter first? the
Yeah,
latter,
yeah,
how I
whatever.
got into well,
Fine, yeah.
uh, well, kind of goes back to my background a little bit. I got my bachelor's when I was in Minnesota psychology and political science, and because I love the psychology, but Skinner was the dominant guy back then in his rats, and there was something to my mind missing, but I managed to take a course at the very end of the last semester. This is 66, 67, okay, with a guy from Michigan who was into more cognitive psychology and Piaget. And that's where I thought, oh, wow, there's something that can happen here in psychology to really understand the brain and the mind and what the brain's doing, and as opposed to Skinner, who had prohibited any knowledge of the brain. Okay, just reinforcement laws. So then you've got a 3-year period where I end up in Vietnam in the Marines and come back, and I came back to the University of Minnesota. I was going to get my degree in psychology, I decided. And I'll be frank, I had kind of had, after I got back from Vietnam, let's say a mystical experience where I kind of saw things differently about the nature of this universe. And some of what Piaget said rang bells, because Piaget was always describing how the child starts out undifferentiated from the world, not even knowing he's a separate subject from, as opposed to a subject surrounded by objects, like baby bottles and people and mothers, and et cetera, et cetera. And gradually he develops this cognitive state where he's an individual, and objects have independent existence and forces that move objects, et cetera. And he's a force among other forces and an object among other objects, et cetera. And in my joke, he begins to need a Zen koan at that point, to re-achieve enlightenment. Okay, but so I had this idea when I went back to Minnesota that I was going to explore this idea. What would this mean if, let's say the universe is a little more mystical than you thought? And I run into one of the first professors I have is a guy named Dr. Bart, who's interested it was a Piaget course. And I said, well, he wanted a paper. And I said, well, I want to write a paper on the epistemology of Jean Piaget. Okay. This goes back to my other, why epistemology? Because I had a course in epistemology long ago, and that was about subject and object to some degree. I knew nothing of, you have to realize in your adolescent mind, very little. And by this time I'm 24 and or 22 and out of the Marines. But this is my idea. He said, well, why don't you study Bergson? Why don't you compare Bergson to Piaget? Okay, so that's how I got started with Bergson. So sure, I can do that. How am I going to do that? I don't even know. I've never heard of Bergson before. So you end up, what do you do when you don't know anything about somebody? You find someone that's written to someone about it. And so there was a book by Wool and Carr on the philosophy of Bergson. So obviously, instead of reading Bergson, you would read someone's digestion of Bergson first. I'm kind of joking, but that's the way things work in this world of people. And the first thing I run across is this statement, like the relation of subject and object, the distinction in their union must be put in terms of time, not space. And I'm thinking, whoa, that's Zen koan like. What does that mean? Okay, I have no idea. Okay, but it resonated. Like, oh, gee, I've got to follow up on this, And so that's how I got into Bergson and started reading. And then what you discover is that when I started reading Matter and Memory, and what you discover is that it's incredibly hard to understand, even though he's very lucid writer and very metaphorical and very straightforward. But I mean, these are sets of concepts that are hard to understand, and furthermore, he's still not understood. And the reason he's not understood is because he had a holographic model of the universe back in 1896, 50 years nearly before Dennis Gabor discovers holography in 1947. Okay, now I didn't understand this at the time. You got one more piece of the experience here. I am in University of Minnesota, where there's a guy named Robert Shaw, who's a student of James J. Gibson. He studied with Gibson's this great theorist of perception, well known for the concept of affordances that runs around all over the place, you know. But he's a student of perception, a theory of perception. How we see the world out there, how I see the key cup out here and out there on the table, or you have a cup too. See, so how do you see that? And so Shaw, utterly brilliant guy, and he's this is around 1972, and he's invited Karl Pribram to come and talk. Now Pribram might be a name that's not interested or you're not familiar with. Pribram had written a book around 1971, I think called The Languages of the Brain, and he was starting to trot out the idea that the brain is holographic. The brain is a hologram. And that accounts for how the brain stores memory. You know, and the neural network is kind of a holographic thing. And that might, he thought, maybe account for how we see the coffee cup, but he had no real model of this. And Shaw, this is in this seminar I was in, starts describing holography. Pribram isn't there, but it's a seminar. He's there. He's going to talk in the next day or something like that, I think, at this conference. And Shaw's describing holography, and he goes all through holography, how it works, you know. And you know, in a holographic framework, you've got a hologram plate, and you've stored a wavefront on that plate. It's called the object wave. Let's say from your cup, you have a reference wave that's a coherent laser wave. I got to keep my hands up here so you can see. The reference wave hits the plate. The wave from the cup hits the plate. There's an interference pattern at the plate. Okay. The reference wave has a certain very coherent frequency. We'll call it frequency 1 from a laser. Very coherent, single frequency. Then if you shine a reconstructive wave through the plate, again, the reconstructive wave being a reference frequency 1, again, exact same wave frequency as the as a reference wave. You see behind the plate the cup. You know, the cup is specified as the wave front from the. You see the object wave rising up to your eye behind the plate, and then you see the cup down in depth, okay, with a bit of 3D because you can move around and see the cup from the side, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's roughly the holographic method and process. And Shaw's saying, what if I were to say that the brain isn't a hologram, but the universe is the hologram, and the brain is in the hologram. The brain is the reconstructive wave within the hologram. Okay, and why is the universe a hologram? Because you have the idea that it's a giant interference pattern, and on the hologram plate, every point from that cup can be conceived as a little spherical wave that covers the entire plate. So conversely, then, at any point on the hologram is the information for the entire cup. Okay, so in other words, at any point on the hologram is the information for the totality of the cup. Let's just go through that one more time. At any point on the cup, any point is a circular wave going. So, but then you have, in other words, at any point on the hologram, you have the intersection of all the circular waves from the cup. Okay, if you visualize the cup as a pile of little points giving off circular waves, then at any point on the hologram is the information for the whole cup. And indeed, you can take a little piece of the hologram, and shine your reconstructive way through it to still see the whole cup. Okay, the information for the whole is at any point. Okay, and so when Shaw was discussing that, I suddenly realized what Bergson was talking about in Matter and Memory, because he had this passage there where he's talking about, well, we'll go back to how do you see the coffee cup? I'm going to put it in that terms, because we know that there's no image of the coffee cup in the brain. Okay, I mean, neuroscience was advanced enough in those days that they knew very well that you could look throughout the brain, in the neural structure of the brain, and not find any coffee cup there. Nothing looks like a coffee cup in the brain. So he says, well, isn't it obvious that the photograph, like the photograph of the coffee cup, is developed in the very heart of things, is already developed in the very heart of things, and at all points of space. Okay.
So can I interrupt? When you say developed at the heart of things, just for the listener again, if you could elucidate.
Yeah, that would be at every point. The heart of things would be at every point in the universe, in the field, in this external field. At every point, in the field, the heart of things is this information for the whole. This holographic property, already developed in the very heart of things at all points in space. In other words, the universe itself is a holographic field.
Okay.
It is the hologram plate. Okay. And he goes on, for example, in that passage, he says, well, if you take Faraday's lines of force, okay, the lines of force proceed in every direction, in other words, from any object, the lines of force intersect at every point in space. At every point in space is the reflection of the lines of force from the whole. Just like ultimately the Mach principle was saying this. Okay. Take up the Leibnizian monads. Each moment is the reflection of the whole. Okay.
It's funny you said that. I was literally thinking of Leibniz as you were mentioning this. So I'm glad that we're on the same page there. Yeah.
Right. So that was that. So in other words, that was that passage. Remember when I was saying it was really hard to understand Matter and Memory, because that was the heart of chapter 1 in a way. Chapter 1 in Matter and Memory goes through perception, the problem of perception. How is it that we see the cup out there in space on the kitchen table with the spoon stirring? And again, you're back to this idea. Well, the universe is a hologram. In other words, if you put Bergson in modern holographic terms, and I'm not going to go through everything that he says that is indicative of this, but I'll just say what he was essentially saying is, well, the universe is a holographic field. The brain is the reconstructive wave passing through this field, like passing through the hologram, and it's specific to an object wave, the source of the object wave, that is the cup. Okay, the source of this interference pattern that it's interacting with, and to add a little bit the real piece of complexity yet to it, then you have to bring in Bergson's model of time, okay, to understand that other principle, why is subject and object related in terms of time, not space. I'm not sure I want to quite go there yet, but um, that is the reason that chapter one is so difficult to understand is because it's so Zen-like and so anticipatory of holography. Even in his own times, people thought, well, chapter one is pretty obscure. No one quite knows what he's saying. Well, you can see now, if you don't have the holographic model, you don't know what he's saying. Okay, but that's how he's explaining the origin. Now, let me back up one more second. I'm really back up, but let's fast forward to Chalmers and the hard problem. Okay, what Chalmers did is basically misstate, in my opinion, the hard problem. He misguided us. He put the problem entirely in terms of qualia. How do we see the qualia, the blue qualia of the cup, and the steam coming out, the steamy qualia, and the brown of the tea here, and etc. How do we explain how it feels like something? He used that phraseology still in 1995. How do we explain like feels like something? Well, Bergson understood the hard problem very well in 1896, way before Chalmers. 100 years before Chalmers, he understood the hard problem. And the better way to put the hard problem, or general way, is how do we explain the origin of the image of the external world? Remember, you've got nothing in the brain that looks like the coffee cup. You don't have the qualia, you don't have the cup, you don't have the form. And so the problem is everything in the image of the cup is qualia. There's nothing that's not qualia. Even the form, I could show you, ultimately is qualitative, even though the computer mind guys like to think, well, form is just very geometric, and if you can easily compute it, and we can account for the form, except for a minor problem that it's got to be either a gray form or a black form. Still going to have some color, Oh, we're back to qualia anyhow in a way, but nevertheless, they somehow think they can explain form, but they can't. But the truth is, no, form is not as any more computable than the blue of the cup or any other piece of the qualia. So, in other words, the more general form of the hard problem is explaining the origin of the image of the external world. The cup with all of its qualities, which is the entire image is qualia. So the fact that Chalmers kind of misguided by simply saying, well, we have to explain the qualia, makes it even more difficult to understand Bergson, because I've been there experience-wise. They'll say, well, if you say, well, but Bergson has a model that explains the origin of the image of the external world, they say, well, that's not the hard problem. You have to explain how it feels like. Okay, so, well, that's true, but you have to explain how we see the coffee cup, and that coffee cup is qualia, and there's, and let me put it this way. This is the most fundamental problem in the nature of mind and the nature of intelligence. This is the primary problem. You have to have a model of perception, how we see this coffee cup, and this, by the way, is AKA experience, also our sentience. Okay, I mean, if this isn't, I'm sitting there stirring the coffee here, if that's, I see the cup, I see this thing, the swirl of the coffee, etc. If that's not my sentience, I don't know what it is. Okay, but it's also my image of this external world out here. So without that, then the next question is, well, if you can't explain that, how are you certain how you're explaining the storage of experience in the brain. Okay, let me explain why that's a little piece to the question, because in Bergson's model, this experience is not occurring solely within the brain. The brain is a reconstructive way specific to the cup out here in the external field. Okay, the cup is right where it says it is, so we say, in common sense out here external to us, as we all commonsensically know. That's what one thing Bergson felt he had accomplished, is that this theory explained common sense, because very well the literature is filled with common sense tells us that the cup is out here, but really it's inside the brain somehow, all the neurons firing, and somehow we have an image of a coffee cup out here, but we don't know how. Okay. And Bergson said, well, we do know how. The brain's a reconstructive wave, it's specific to the cup out here, but the experience isn't entirely in the brain. Therefore, it can't be entirely stored in the brain. Okay, hence matter and memory. Okay, hence the title. The first chapter was on this holographic model of perception. The next two chapters, 2 and 3, were on all the evidence that he'd looked at for the previous 5 years as to why you can't actually, why the model of the brain as the storage area for experience, for the suitcase we carry experience around, it doesn't work. In fact, it's contraindicated. And so he spent 2 chapters on that, on why, on basically how you're going to have a different model. In the context of our current dilemma on AI and intelligence and simulating the brain, you can see how critical this question.
Yes.
However, if you don't have a...
I completely agree, but I think I want to just hold on to that point for a bit to leave it to the end of the conversation. The reason being, there was a lot there, and certainly a lot of metaphysics that's going to be hard to grasp. Sorry, it's a bit windy here. Apologies for the background noise. But it's going to be a bit hard to grasp, let's say, on first impression. So, but one thing I do like is that you really do use some very technical work by J.J. Gibson in his theory of perception. And you connect that to kind of the metaphysical framework put forward by Henri Bergson. So just again, at a high level, can you outline how this relates to J.J. Gibson?
Right. Good point. Good question. And kind of takes us back to, remember Shaw, he's my thesis advisor and my mentor here, Gibson student. And so this is entirely in the context of explicating Gibson. So let's put it this way. Let's start with this cup of coffee, the coffee cup, coffee stirring. Okay, Gibson's known for affordances, but underlying affordances is his whole notion of the importance of invariance laws. Okay, so when I'm stirring a cup of coffee, the surface swirl is a radial flow field. The flow field is a set of velocity vectors. When I'm driving down the road, a flow field is going by me, a set of velocity vectors. When I'm stirring, the periodicity is defined by a adiabatic invariance, so that ratio of energy of oscillation to the frequency of oscillation. There's an inertial tensor involved that's expressive of the various moments of momenta as I'm stirring this, and it's carried over a haptic flow field of my arm and my hand. There's acoustical invariance as the spoon clinks against the sides of the cup. So there's a whole set of invariance laws in this dynamic event of coffee stirring. Even as I move the coffee across what Gibson called the texture gradient, as I move the cup back and forth across the table surface, that's a texture gradient, or the little texture elements are a function of the distance to the eye. The horizontal separation is proportional to 1 over the distance. The vertical separation is proportional to 1 over the distance squared. As I move the cup back and forth across this gradient, the height of the cup is changed. Well, the height of the cup relative to the number of texture rows it occludes is always constant. Closer to me, it's including maybe 2 rows. Farther away, it's occluding 4 rows. Okay, so there's that ratio is specific to or specifying the height constancy of the cup. We don't see the cup change in our perception. It's the constant height. So the whole event is filled with these invariance laws, and what when you say that, taking that to the Bergson side, well, let's take, first of all, what Gibson saw is that the brain has to be resonating to this structure, this dynamic structure of invariance. As I stir the coffee and I turn the cup and I move it back and forth. Resonance was what he was forced to, because it's a time extended thing, and the invariants don't exist at an instant, a mathematical instant of time. They exist over this flow of this event. Okay, and so he saw the brain as resonating, tuning, adjusting to the invariance structure of the event. Okay, and then he would say, well, and it's specific to the event out here in the environment. Okay, so he never ever really explicated how that's specific to results in an image. Okay, that is, he still has the same problem that Bergson started out with. Well, yes, I'm resonating to this dynamic 4D structure of my stirring event, but it's still just neurochemical flows in the brain. I still don't see a coffee cup, inside those in the neurochemical flows. Nor do I see it in the changing bit patterns of a computer, for that matter. It's
Absolutely.
So how do I get the coffee cup out of Bergson's resonance? Well, the answer is that Gibson only makes sense within Bergson's framework. That the field that the coffee cup is in is a holographic field, and the information that the brain is resonating to, all this invariant structure, is what's driving the modulation of the brain as a reconstructive wave. Okay, so that's where it starts. I personally think that Gibson had read Bergson, and it's kind of a shame that his library wasn't. I don't know if it was. I don't think it was saved or cataloged or something, because when I wrote, just preview something. I mean, I published an article in the Ecological Psychology journal. That Ecological Psychology is the journal that Shaw, my mentor, started. Okay, he was the founding guy on ecological psychology. Very recently, it was titled Gibson and Time, and what I was sort of shocked at, I presumed that Gibson used this framework, but I mean, I saw multiple statements in Gibson that just resonated like Bergson, and as far as the nature of time goes. And we can come back to that later, but just kind of making my point here that there's many reasons why I think Gibson has to be placed within Bergson's holographic brain as a reconstructive wave framework. where the invariant structure of the event is the driving the modulation of that reconstructive wave. And that's a little piece I didn't mention when back in the holographic model, let's explain that, because you can store multiple wavefronts on your hologram. Like if you can take a reference wave of frequency 1 and store like your coffee cup wavefront, the interference pattern. Then substitute the coffee cup for my mouse here, okay? And use reconstructive wave of frequency 2 and beam that off the mouse and back up onto the hologram plate. Now I've got a interference pattern that's a function of the object wave from the mouse and the reconstructive and the reference wave of frequency 2. Now I'll put my microphone there, okay, and use frequency 3. So I've got 3 wavefronts stored on that hologram, okay, with reference wave, frequency 1, frequency 2, and frequency 3, 3 different reference waves. Now I beam my reconstructive wave through that hologram, okay. If I modulate the wave to frequency 1, what's specified is the image of the cup, okay. The object wave now rising to my eye is specific to the cup out there in space. If I modulate the reconstructive wave to frequency 2, the object wave that's now specifying itself to me is that from the mouse. Okay, I'm seeing the mouse, the object wave from the mouse. The mouse being the source of the object wave. So guess what happens if I modulate to frequency 3? I'm going to see the microphone. Modulate back to frequency 2. I'm going to see the mouse. Okay, get the picture of a modulated reconstructive wave. So the brain is being modulated by the events that you're perceiving. I'm looking at the coffee cup being stirred, and then I move over and I see the kitty cat running by. Different event modulating the brain. That's the notion of a modulated reconstructive wave, where the invariance laws defining the events are modulating the brain. Okay, you can get a picture now of how different this is, by the way, from the AI model. This is because when I say reconstructive wave, I'm talking a very concrete wave. Okay, as concrete, I like to say, as an AC motor, generating an electric field of force. It's not obviously an AC motor. I've literally had reviewers say, "You're saying it's an AC motor." I said, okay, duh moment. No, I didn't mean it's no. It's very concrete.
In fact, can I interrupt here for a moment, Stephen? I would ask, when you say wave, what type of waves? Because this seems to me that the modulator.
I'm thinking of
like I articulate with them what you mean by a wave in that sense.
Well, it's a good question. In my little mind, it's the whole neural mass forms a wave. Okay, you visualize the neural mass as kind of a gelatinous mass. Okay, and it's in that sense, it's a waveform. And when I part of the interesting aspect of this and why it's this very concrete biochemical mass wave is, if you notice, I don't know if you got to that point in the chat, but I put this paper out in the Psychology of Consciousness journal. I and another guy, David Logan, on LSD and perception. Okay, and our argument is that, see, the brain, how can I put LSD acts as no, I've forgotten the believe it or not, the little phraseology I should be using. It just finally came back. Cardinal absorbent. A cardinal absorbent. Okay,
What is that?
cardinal a cardinal absorbent is a let's say it's just an opera. It's in uh, in uh, in the biochemical framework. It it controls the rate of oscillation of a mass. Okay, so ATP would be an example of a cardinal absorbent. LSD in the model we're discussing serves as a cardinal absorbent, takes over as the cardinal absorbent via electronic inductance. It raises the whole frequency of the mass. Okay, again, sort of visualizing it as a gelatinous mass. It would have to look at Albert. We discussed this thing, and I'm going to discuss it in the book, Albert Links' associative induction framework. Okay, but if you can imagine, you're raising the rate of vibration of the mass. Okay, the rate of oscillation. Okay, well, you're going to get the standard LSD effects that where time ceases to slow down. What do they mean by time slowing down? Well, the fly, who's normally a buzzing fly, his wings start to flap slowly. Okay, as you're stirring the coffee, the coffee swirl is slowing down. The conversation that we're listening to is slowing down. Okay, the fan that be blowing on you on the desk is slowing down. Okay, because because the brain as a biochemical mass is involved in specifying the scale of time. Okay, that the Minkowski manifold that we like to visualize, that 4D manifold, that can we like to visualize it at the scale of electrons and protons, et cetera, et cetera. But but that's not the scale that we perceive. The there's an infinity of possible scales. Something is involved in specifying the scale of time of perception. That's the brain. That's the neurochemical dynamics of the brain. So, we normally see the fly buzzing by with the wings a blur, 200 oscillations per second seem as a blur. But if you put enough the right dose of LSD in, okay, the fly is going to be slowed down to where it's barely flapping its wings like a heron. So scale, notice back to the notion of qualia, okay? Scale is qualia. The scale of time already is qualia. So you're when you're talking again back to the accounting for the origin of the image of the external world, the image is not only just qualia in terms of colors, the red of a sunset, the taste of a qualia. It's qualia in terms of the very way it's specified at a scale of time. I mean, for enough LSD, this cup starts to become, your glass starts to become translucent. Okay, and the liquid has a whole different form of quality, etc. So you see, again, we're verging on why the standard, very abstract computational AI framework could be so wrong. Because how is an AI, how is abstract computation going to account for the specified scale of time of the universe that we perceive, we live in? We live in a certain scale of time. So, already you've got a very interesting index that something is wrong. Not only can you not explain the origin of the image of the external world, but you can't explain why it's got a time scale as well.
Indeed, indeed.
So,
Okay, excellent, Stephen. I think we're getting to the crux of this conversation. However, there's one other question I want to touch on before we get to I would say, the underlying theme of this conversation. So, as you know, my goal was in the theme of your book to focus this conversation on generally Henri Bergson's challenge to AI. However, it's really important because when you reached out to me a few months ago, you made a really interesting claim that, in your view, through when we discussed the philosophy of AI, or let's call it a metaphysical framework, a better thinker is Bergson over Heidegger. And I know perhaps that's a whole other can of worms to open there and to, we probably won't have the time. However, I think it's worth mentioning, just in your view, why do you think Bergson is a better theorist, apropos AI, than Heidegger? Because
Well,
as you might know,
yeah,
sorry to interrupt,
that's a
as you
fun.
might know,
Yeah,
Heidegger
it's
is
a
the thinker that's in, Hubert Dreyfus, all these thinkers that are kind of being used from the tradition of phenomenology for AI. But you're saying
yeah,
it's Bergson over Heidegger.
it's a great question. It's a fun question.
Yeah, that's what I
um,
was thinking.
um, the and we should advertise it. I did a YouTube on Heidegger versus Bergson, um, and I, well, it actually kind of starts right off the bat with where we've just been talking about. Heidegger doesn't have a model of the origin of the image of the external world. Number one, he just doesn't have that. He number two, he not I'm not totally denigrating Heidegger. He had some great stuff, okay, but the fact that he had no model, no model of perception, kind of undercuts the strength of his theory. Okay, as far as presenting a true alternative that AI could take a look at and deal with. Okay, uh, I say that because as I look at, I did my discussion of Heidegger in the context of Hubert Dreyfus and his series of lectures on Heidegger, and I was shocked when I looked at Wiki's discussion of Dreyfus and Heidegger that they thought, well, everything Dreyfus said about Heidegger has now been subsumed under the connectionist framework of neural nets, and therefore we can write off Dreyfus and Heidegger. We've taken care of it. Okay, so that'll give you an index as to why Heidegger needed an actual real alternative model of mind. Okay, the second, I mean, another problem is um, Heidegger didn't really understand, I don't think, Bergson's model of time. He mentioned Bergson, and it seems like he only maybe read Time and Free Will and didn't understand the nature of Bergson's model of time, which we probably got to go into in a second. Um, and and he kind of trashed Bergson in a couple footnotes, or at least one footnote of being in time. Like, well, Bergson didn't understand this. He doesn't have a model of time that covers the whole cosmic problem of time. Like a, I think he thought Bergson only had a model of time that related to individual consciousness, shall we say, and not didn't apply to physics or the universe as a whole. Okay, which is very, very wrong. So to me, Bergson directly addressed the hard problem of consciousness as well. He just didn't just dumped that term somewhere in the Bergson's book. You know, oh, by the way, I'm talking about the hard problem, and the whole thing, is seen as for what it was, and a massive uh, tour de force on the hard problem.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
but that can't be exactly said of Heidegger at all. Um, so I don't know what I would have to bring back a whole lot more into my memory slots about Heidegger to carry on in this conversation,
Yeah.
but
Well, I mean,
that
one of
kind of that
Heidegger's
kind of sums it up.
critiques, as you know, Heidegger was critiquing Descartes and Kant, and not really Kant, more the Cartesian tradition, and he didn't even probably like this notion of consciousness in the sense of like it's something in here with us, the subject object divide, and he was trying to get away from that. And yeah, I mean, I think I spoke to Simon Critchley, and he probably mentioned that Heidegger was in the process of writing a second part to Being and Time uh,
Yeah.
to discuss these matters. But regardless, I mean, Heideggerian scholarship is it's vast and extensive. In fact, I think now it takes a lifetime to get through Heideggerian scholarship and phenomenology. as a matter of fact. So, all right, Stephen, I think it's, again, you mentioned time a couple of times, so no pun intended. It's probably just, again, outlining Bergson's theory of time, please.
Right. I think the most important thing to understand and maybe describe it as is that there's two different metaphysics of space and time. Okay, Bergson is reacting to what I call now the classic metaphysic of space and time, and he's describing a temporal metaphysic of space and time. And that is the crux of the issue and even the crux of the AI problem, in my opinion. Okay, what's the classic metaphysic? As Bergson described it, it's an abstract space. It's a principle of infinite divisibility. And the best way to visualize it, I like to say, so imagine what Bergson would call a stretch of concrete extensity, like a lake and the lake shore and the trees beyond, et cetera, et cetera. And over that concrete extensity, we place a conceptual matrix, shall we say, uh, of points. That is, we place the continuum of points and positions. Okay, the infinitely dense continuum of points positions. It's ultimately a three-dimensional continuum of points positions. Infinitely divisible, because between any pair of points I can insert another line, shall we say, of points, and between that pair, any points on that pair, I can insert another pair. So it's a principle of infinite divisibility. I can divide that spatial abstract space infinitely into finer and finer and finer points, ad infinitum. There is no end to it in reality, unless I arbitrarily take a limit, which is a mathematical arbitrary rule. So well, I can take a limit at this point, okay, and then I can see what I got. But time now becomes a series, like it becomes the series of instants. So that correspond to the motion of an object traveling in that on a trajectory through that continuum. That is, the object is now passing along the continuum. It's a line of points in the continuum, point after point after point. Each point corresponds to an instant of time. Okay, so that's our model of time, a series of points or instants, again, infinitely divisible. It comes back to Zeno's paradoxes. I can continue creating these points ad infinitum. So it's both an infinite regress, because I can't stop this placing points along that trajectory, the motion of the cup along the continuum from point A to point B. And it's an absurdity, because I'm trying to describe motion as a series of immobilities. Okay, each point is an immobility. So it's both an absurdity and an immobility, but that's the fundamental nature of the classic metaphysic. And if you notice, each point would correspond to a state of the entire universe. Okay, and so I like to visualize this, each state of the universe as a cube. The whole universe is a big cube. Okay, and that cube has an extent of time, ultimately, of a mathematical point. What's a mathematical point? It's a point with no end and no beginning, so it's no longer can be divided. Therefore, there is no time in that cube. But so the motion of the cup would be a cube after cube after cube after cube of the universe, where each cube would have no qualities whatsoever. There can't be qualities in the cube, because there's no time. Right? It's a mathematical point in time duration. And and of course, how do you account for the rebirth of a next cube, cube after cube after cube? This Bergson noted this is where Descartes ended up saying, well, you need a God, because Descartes he understood this general framework that he was propounding of this particular metaphysic. But then, well, how do you account for the continuous creation of cubes after cube after cube? Well, you need a God to create the cubes. Okay, Bergson put it this way: physics doesn't escape continuous creation ultimately, because it's implied that something is creating cube after cube after cube in this metaphysic. So that's the classic metaphysic. It underlies all of our mathematics. It underlies calculus. It underlies AI. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yes, because what you have ultimately when the Turing definition of computation is state after state after state, mathematical state after mathematical state
Yeah, I
after
mean, in computer
mathematical
science,
state.
we have in computer science we have state machines. Like in, I think first year of uni, we would build a simple state machine to understand concepts in programming. So yeah, that's certainly that's like
Yes,
the underlying metaphysic for a lot of the modern
yes,
sciences.
yes. The temporal metaphysic that Bergson was describing was basically defined as on the basis that motion has to be treated as indivisible. It's not a series of states. If in his metaphor, the best way to look at it is like a melody, where each note reflects the previous note, and each note interpenetrates or permeates the next note. A melodic organic continuity. Okay, so they don't really have discrete states. Your instants are really notes that interpenetrate and permeate the next as an organic continuity. And of course, space is this extensity. It's not really the concrete. It's not really the continuum of points positions. It's a true extensity, concrete that where the trying to trying to define as a series of points is just an abstraction. In fact, what he would actually say, Bergson, was ultimately this classic metaphysic is in reality an ideal limit that's never reached in the concrete world. In the concrete world of extensity and indivisible transformation of time, indivisible melodic transformation, the abstract classic metaphysic of space and time, your abstract space with your fourth dimension being the abstract time of instance, is an ideal limit, but it's never truly reached. Okay, and so again, if you kind of go back to AI and even modern physics, the presumption is that that ideal limit is the reality. Okay, we've kind of inverted this. Well, this is the reality. Everything's based on this ideal limit that's never actually reached. But in reality, no, your ideal limit is just a nice way of describing things mathematically that kind of works because the universe tends to this limit but never reaches this limit. So hence the unreal effectiveness of mathematics and physics in
I'm gonna throw
practice.
I'm gonna throw a term at you, Stephen, and I want to see how you react here. What if one postulates that reality is ontologically open or incomplete? How would you react to such a claim?
Mm. I think I'd go with it. I think that's what Bergson would say. I mean, he's argued that, well, we're not even sure that creation is finished, or how can I put it? The universe is even done building. Okay, so or that we know the end of any natural, we know the end of all laws or anything. No, laws aren't still evolving. He would still say that. Okay, though, yeah. So he would. I think yes, that would be highly amenable to the Bergson framework.
Yeah, because I mean, again, it's quite a speculative claim here, but Lee Smolin, the great physicist, I deeply admire him. He wrote a book called Time Reborn, probably my top five favorite, popular science books, and he kind of implies in that yeah, reality is in a fundamental sense open and incomplete, but also he claims that perhaps it's the case that even the laws of the universe themselves are like in this process of evolving. They aren't like these set static laws. Now, obviously, I can't back that up with the technically with the physics because I'm not a physicist. But however, he kind of theorizes on that. So I find this. I'm coming to realize a lot of the thinkers that I'm drawn towards, again now, thanks to you, people like even Bergson, they they really they really fall on the side that reality has like an openness or incompleteness to it. It's not like the world is just out there static and then we are in the world trying to make sense of the world. It's a bit more nuanced
Hmm.
than that. But yeah, look, Stephen, I think now we've laid down enough groundwork, a lot of metaphysical groundwork, and I'm sure. Look, I'll try to leave resources in the show notes, including all the lectures in your YouTube channel, because obviously some of the terms it's a bit hard to get one's head around them. But again, the underlying theme of the conversation is, as you say in your book, the challenge to AI. So let me formulate this question in this way. Let's try and use a contemporary conversation in the AI world, which is this whole notion of the ARC-AGI challenge. I know you did a lecture on that, and
Hmm.
recently, ChatGPT's O1 scored I think 88% or something, pretty high. I played the game. It's a very fun game, pattern recognition, visual game. And then Francois Chalet, he's very clear about this. He says that ARC-AGI, it's not like a Turing test, a modern Turing test that measures intelligence. It's not that. It's simply for him, it's simply a research tool. So, and I really like his kind of sensibility in that sense, where he says this isn't the thing that defines intelligence or whatever. However, you still have a critique of his fundamental metaphysics too, or his fundamental like Weltanschauung or outlook on intelligence, reality, whatever the case may be. But yeah, could you outline maybe use something like the ARC-AGI challenge, something that it's well known in the amongst AI connoisseurs, practitioners, researchers, and still then try and make a critique of AI using something a bit more concrete like that as an example, if it's possible. I know that's a huge ask, but if possible, Stephen.
Well, yeah. What caught my eye about ARC-AGI was that they were very visual tests that seem to, well, basically are relying on our ability to image, visualize via imagery. Okay. And um, when the other thing that caught my eye was he mentioned Piaget. Uh, and Piaget's, and I had spent a lot of time studying Piaget's works when I was in graduate school. They got the child's conception of time, child's conception of space, the child's conception of number, and child's conception of movement and speed. Okay, all these different books, and they're laborious to go through because it's pretty dense. Um, but and what I thought was interesting is that Piaget requires Bergson's device, okay, when his model of the brain, because if you go back to our original discussion, if you don't have a theory of the origin of the image of the external world, you don't have a theory of imagery, period. You can't use images. You can't use, and that's precisely AI's. dilemma right now. They don't really have a theory of images. And if you think that a bunch of correlated pixels is an image, because I've got a weights that say this output unit corresponds to a number 9 because it's a number 9 that's, on this pixel pattern of 28 by 28 pixels. I've got enough colored pixels to make a 9, and that's therefore an image of a 9. You're sadly mistaken. It's not. You're back to the coffee cup doesn't exist in the it doesn't exist in the neurons, and then it doesn't exist in the machine. Okay, pixels are not. So you don't have a theory of image. What Piaget was describing was the cognitive development of the child's, ultimately the human use of imagery in what ultimately is a mathematical group characterized form. That is, where you have images that now become reversible, they're closed, they've got an identity property, etc. The flexible, reversible use of imagery, and this is what he called operational thought. Ultimately, where you can. One of the experiments I like to discuss or talk about all the time was, the child is shown a little tunnel with little 3 beads are run in. We'll call them A, B, and C. They're actually colored red, green, blue. And then the tunnel is rotated 180 degrees, and the child is asked what order does it come out in. Okay. And obviously the order is going to reverse, but then it keeps getting worse. They'll rotate it 360 degrees, and then they'll rotate it 5 times and 7 times. And there's a point where the children, there's a whole set of stages that children go through. But what Piaget makes it clear is that there's a point where they can sort of visualize 3 or 4 rotations, and then they just flake out because they can't do the imagery anymore until finally they come to perceive, shall we say, that there's the odd even rule going on here. If I do a 360, I'm going to keep the order the same. Any odd number is going to reverse the order. And to him, it's that flexible use of imagery that is the index of the growing intelligence. Just like in the concept of number, where the child can see that the row of the vases and the flowers, and if you can put the vases and the flowers in one-to-one correspondence, right? You have 6 vases, you pull the flowers out, you crunch the vases together, flowers are still sitting there in a line, and you ask the child, okay, is the same number of vases as flowers? And he'll say, no, now there's more flowers because the vases are crunched together. If you crunch the flowers together and leave the vases out, then now the child will say, well, wait a second, there's more vases. Until finally the child can overcome that perceptual imagery, the perceptual inertia, shall we say, of the imagery, and start saying, well, I can compensate. Yeah, you closed the vases, but you left the flowers the same. I could open the vases back up, and then obviously they're going to be the one-to-one correspondence. So if you see what I mean about this growth of this reversibility of the images. So that's really the essential ingredient of, I'm going to call it human general intelligence. What Piaget is describing is the growth of human general intelligence, its ability to use our experience, our imagery, and I'll just call it this mathematical group, framework. I think he got that from Ernst Cassirer slightly before in 1929. Cassirer wrote about the concept of group and perception. It's kind of funny because I know you wanted to ask me about 01 or 03, and with respect to the ARC, and I was just and you know, I was looking because OpenAI isn't exactly open, as I think you know.
When they realize,
and
when they realize the
so
they're
what
closing
are they
AI.
exactly doing? And I read this description. So, well, O3 is still is basically a autoregressive LLM that's using chain of thought. So it's an LLM autoregressive that has just given time to think. You know,
Yeah,
and of
reasoning,
course I've
so-called reasoning model. Yeah.
yeah, and I've got to look at, okay, what's chain of thought, and and of course that's what OpenAI is actually doing with their chain of thought. I don't think we truly know. It sounds to me like they're doing some sort of prompting, or built in some prompts that seem to work for the ARC-AGI test. And I'm presuming that the audience here has seen the ARC-AGI test.
I think so. Yeah, yeah. If
I'm
not,
hoping. I'm hoping.
if not, I'll put an overlay for
Yeah,
the listeners,
because
but for the
the point,
watchers. Yeah.
yeah, a point I made.
It
I mean,
was.
this last video I did about the neural scaling laws, but I sort of came back with a little postscript about back to Chalets. When you look at the uh, the test that O3 failed, even though O3 did wonderfully, on percentage wise, the test that they failed was so simple, that and you just can't help but see it perceptually, like, well, if I just extend this line here and I extend this line here, and it goes through all these little blocks of squares and turns the red blocks blue, well, that's the rule. It's so obvious, and yet the AI failed. That you're left. Well, there's something going on with our use of imagery that AI just can't deal with. It's an index of something completely different is going on. I, when I was looking at examples of the COT, and now I forgot the channel, but the guy was saying, "Well, I did this little test with prompting. I made up this little uh, problem where I said, okay, I'm repeating him now. He says something like, well, I took a ball and I had a box without a bottom, and I put the ball in the box and I took it and put it on my desk, and then I put the box in a bigger box and I sent it to the in the post office, and they shipped it to New York. Tell me where the ball is, okay? and uh, the I think it was ChatGPT comes back and says, well, it's in New York, and and of course you're thinking, well, but wait a second, there was no box, no bottom in the box. Right away the image is hitting you like, well, wait a second, you know, if you put the ball in the box and you see where our imagery and experience just comes in instantly, like, well, how did you even get the ball to your desk? You must have put the box on the desk. Then with the ball in it, you lifted up the box. The ball's still going to be there, and then you put it in another box.
Yeah,
You
yeah. I mean,
know,
I probably should mention this just for the listener. Like, it's called, I believe, Moravec's paradox or something. Where in like the AI world, where it's a very simple notion. It's more an observation where initially researchers thought that what will take a lot of computational resources would be this like abstract mathematical reasoning and things that involve
mm-hmm.
very abstract thought. However, we've kind of realized that what's really the challenge in robotics and AI is in fact perception, is in fact even this kind of like more bodily acts that involve the
Right.
physical world. That's the real challenge that even
Mm-hmm.
sometimes enormously gigantic levels of computation will not solve for us, and
Right.
that's why
Well,
I can see how, as a Bergsonian, you're drawn towards the kind of tests that involve visual imagery, like the ARC-AGI challenge.
exactly. Well, you can. Again, I'm just going to put my little position is that, yeah, until if you can't deal with, we're image users. One of the examples I like to use also on that is Penrose with his non-computational thought, where he's so here's a visual proof for of computation doesn't stop. An hexagonal number invariantly added to the previous hexagonal number makes a cube, and he shows this whole little set of you know initial cube of a one, like imagine a little ball, and then he takes 7 and folds them into a 3-sided cube and puts it over the one. Now he's got an 8, 2 by 2 by 2. Then he takes a 9 hexagonal number, folds it into like a 3-sided cube again, sticks it over the other one. Now he's got 3 by 3 by 3, 27. And it keeps, you can see the visual thing just grow, cube by cube by cube. It's obviously going to never stop. But it's this visual transformation of taking your hexagonal number, folding it into a 3-sided almost cube, stacking it over the previous cube, next one, next one, next one, next one. That was his model of non-computational thought, okay? Because what is it? It's imagery over an indivisible time, because you have to be able to see the whole flow of the stacking and see the invariance over the whole globality of the flow. So, anyhow, that you guys, you can see where I'm coming from.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
the AIs are going to be chasing the tail of this for a long time, because no matter how close they come, somebody like Chalet is going to think of more stuff, because we're not the same kind of device.
Correct. Like there's a fundamental ontological difference. I mean, although if I could maybe, because I still do, I want to become, I'm working right now towards going into researching AGI, but like for instance, I'll give an example, Stephen. So convolutional neural networks, Yann LeCun, the whole thing he developed. This was based in the 1990s, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe a bit earlier, on visual perception. So studying the eye, and kind of that's how they build these neural networks. So nonetheless, they still are some kind of mathematical abstraction from how an actual biological eye would visualize and perceive the world, right? So is this like, are you saying that fundamentally there's this like, we can't make this leap from the actual thing, the physical biological thing, and then this abstraction we make into mathematics or computation?
Yeah, I'm saying that it's two different, qualitatively different things. Let me add one more thing. That would be also kind of illustrative of this idea that, see, go back to a little coffee stirring that I'm describing with all the invariance laws, the inertial tensor, the adiabatic invariance, or the ratio of frequency of oscillation, the periodicity of energy of oscillation, and all these, the acoustical. So you have that whole concrete 4-dimensional, because structure where you're not going to capture the inertial tensor in that part of our feeling with an abstraction. So
that's ridiculous.
But when you look at the LLMs, you're looking at, well, here's a set of vectors: spoon, coffee, stir, cream, cup, table, okay, and there's a set of vectors, right? And the vectors show probabilities of being related to every other word in that particular space, okay? Well, actually, the whole space. But those, in other words, that vector space, that set of vectors, is not even close to capturing this 4D concrete dynamical event with its invariance laws. So you see, it's not even close. It's not the same thing at all. You can't reconstruct that event from that set of vectors. You can't compose that event from that set of vectors. Or a 4-dimensional set of, in other words, a vector set after vector set after vector. It isn't going to work. So when they're talking about, just one more thing. So when they're talking about these scaling laws, kind of, well, how can we break that scaling law power line? How can we get better than the error that we have left over? How can we improve that? You're talking about, in my mind, trying to scale a complete unreality. I don't care what your manifold dimensions are. It doesn't. It has no bearing on the actual concrete event. it's an abstraction that they've abstracted into some reality in their minds that has no bearing on reality. This is back to, in other words, back to our comment about Gibson. Well, they're not paying any attention to Gibson, okay, and ecological psychology. That whole subject about, well, what's the nature and structure of events means nothing to them. It's just a set of them. I'm saying the AI guys. It's just a set of vectors. Well,
Yeah.
I think don't you actually have to? Wouldn't you actually have to prove that it's just a set of vectors vis-a-vis the ecological psychology guys? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I want to make 2 points here on everything you said, Stephen. One is just a general point, and not the second one is a bit of a provocation towards you, in fact. So I'll first make the first point. I still do believe there's rich, fruitful research that can take place in AGI, and I think it should come more from the place of cognitive computing. Where, like, for instance, different frameworks in neuroscience, and I know you wrote about active inference and all that.
Wait, I didn't quite get what kind of computing rule?
Cognitive computing. So not really large language models, but rather like so studying human cognition based on that.
Okay.
Or like,
Well, I've never heard that term before.
oh yeah, so there's a company called versus AI that are doing some interesting work, and it takes, I think, 90 odd percent less, according to what they claim, way less computing than what LLMs take, from companies like OpenAI. So I still think there is a lot of research that could take place, but from more like a cognitive computing framework. And for me personally, my research, I'm going towards more embodied AI. That I think that's a huge thing. That being said, all of that being said, the provocation towards you, Stephen, is this, right? So I don't know if you saw this, but I had a dialogue, I moderated a dialogue between this phenomenologist and another, Jeffrey Yoshimi, and then another person who's currently doing his PhD in kind of active inference, that world, Darius. And he made a really good point, which I completely agree with. Like I understand there's this notion now in the critiques of AI that the map is not the territory. So the notion being the mathematical abstraction is not the thing in itself. Like when we make an abstraction of the world, that's not the world, as we've pointed out in this discussion. It's not the real thing, as you said, the different vectors and all that. So, but
Right.
that being said, here's the provocation. I mean, look, maybe
Give me
we
that provocation.
yeah, maybe we should defend a bit of abstraction, or maybe there's a place for abstraction, because, like, at the end of the day, Steven, I mean, abstractions work. I mean, you and I right now, we're abstracting to a certain extent to have this discussion, right? I mean, we can't even communicate with each other as two separate, ostensible consciousnesses without being able to abstract concepts. Like, the concept still is required, isn't it, for our existence? Like, how would you respond to that? I mean, abstractions, the map works. That's why, it may not be the territory, but the map has a place.
Well, this comes down to kind of a question of what's wrong with actual engineering, hardware engineering. Okay, I mean, you can apply the abstraction, but we know that the abstraction isn't the hardware engineering. I mean, let's take our good old AC motor from Tesla. Okay, one could make it work for a long time, other than Tesla, because no one knew all the metals that, and it was that you had to have there, because it would routinely overheat and blow up and kind of blow up. So you had a definite concrete metal forces engineering required to bring that device into working order to work. But same things for the brain. I mean, my opinion is, well, let me put one other question thing though. I can apply then. I can describe the motor mathematically. Ultimately, I mean, Charles Steinmetz wrote a whole book finally, ultimately trying to, theory of electrical phenomena in 1900, so that people could create these motors. Okay, but it's the real physics and the biochemical physics, et cetera, that's really required. So nothing, the abstraction helps ultimately, um, but you need to do the real hardware, the real engineering. I mean, you got this kind of the same problem with the whole. Let's just take physics per se. Okay, do we have a theory of gravity, right? Well, Newton didn't think so, right? He said, hypothesis non fingo. I've got this nice gravitational law here, but it's just a mathematical description. I don't understand what the force is really that gravity is, you know? And then all we've really seen in the evolution is, well, then we got Euler-Lagrange, and we now describe the path an object falls through a gravitational field, but that's basically an embroidering on Newton's law. Okay, nothing more. Newton would still say hypothesis non fingo. I feign no hypotheses. And then Einstein, you know, okay, we've got general relativity, but now people have said, well, yeah, but that's really just Euler-Lagrange geometrized. So Newton's still back to where I feign no hypotheses. In other words, they still haven't really advanced. So in other words, point being, well, we need a more physical theory of gravity than the mathematics is giving. The mathematics is illusory at this point. We need a better concrete physical theory, physics, the real physics involved. Then we can mathematically describe that.
Okay,
See,
okay. I see what you're
somewhere
saying.
along the line, my opinion, somewhere along the line, around the time of Euler, okay, uh, the mathematicians did so cool, you know, with Euler Lagrange being one of the very good examples of the description of these mathematical laws, that the notion started to switch that, well, it's the mathematics that's really, the cool thing here, not we don't really so much as need the physics. Okay, so that's kind of what
I see what you're
that's
saying. I
kind
mean,
of where I'd go. You
no,
know,
no, I think I'm in agreement because the physicist Sabina Hossenfelder, she even makes this point, lost in mathematics, people just get kind of lost in the world
right?
of mathematical abstractions.
Yeah,
And also, I should
yeah.
mention,
She's one that sees this. Yes.
yes, and I should also mention, I see where you're coming from because, yeah, I mean, we shouldn't misunderstand mathematical abstraction with just the abstract theory we speak of. I mean, we all, of course, need a model and a concrete theory of the world, and you could argue that that's some kind of abstraction. But I think the part that you specifically are being critical of is just like overly mathematized abstraction of reality, where everything is, as you said,
Hmm.
vectors or be it whatever, how you represent data in a certain data structure. Excellent.
Right.
Yeah,
I'm,
go ahead. Yeah.
I'm just mouthing or just kind of reflecting Bergson, because this is where he was. This was his notion. He's sort of mischaracterized as being, oh, he doesn't care about, he hates mathematics. He did not. A
Mm,
brilliant mathematician in reality. I mean, he won a prestigious prize in France when he was 18, mathematics prize, and 1979, his math mentor Debove, published a whole series of solutions to Pascal's problems that Pascal had left unsolved, and one of the solutions was Bergson's. You know, he was, you know, Debove said, "Well, you could have been a mathematician. You're just going to be a philosopher." But Bergson was extremely brilliant mathematical mind, but what he saw was, well, mathematics had to be put in its place. You
right.
need
That's it. That's it. Yeah.
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 So yeah, I'm just sort of saying that because he gets that rap that, oh,
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
doesn't really understand mathematics. That
Well,
wasn't the
yeah, yeah. I
case.
think one has to understand, be it mathematical thinking or computational thinking, what that kind of thinking entails, and that's not the only kind of thinking that is involved in thinking, for lack of a better term. Stephen, this has been wonderful. I unfortunately, in the interest of time, have to cut it short. Well, in fact, we've gone over
Yep.
time, but I'm glad I think we covered at least for a introductory dialogue. We covered most of what you've been working on. However, I really do. I mean this sincerely. I really do hope this is the first of many conversations to come where we can really flesh out a bit more the ideas. And in fact, I don't know, maybe we can talk about this offline. Something I want to do this year is to get people, sort of independent researchers like yourself, on the podcast and for you to present your work in more of like a lecture-like fashion. And I think that'd be really fun to do. But regardless, so just for the listeners, what are you currently working on? I mean, I know you just published this book, massive book, Challenge to AI, which I'll leave in the show notes. But what are you currently working on? What's stimulating your mind at the moment?
Oh, nothing much, Rahul. I sort of watch the YouTube, watch the YouTubes of us developing and make a, and maybe I'll do a video every once in a while on something that's hitting me, like the ARC people. I like the ARC,
Perfect. Yeah, you need to do that.
which I think the ARC thing is, like you said, it's a great tool. So anyway, I intend to follow that and other things. So we'll see.
Excellent.
I haven't got a great quest in mind at this point. No more windmills
Nah, fair
to
enough. I mean, I,
attack.
I was, as I was saying before we started recording, you're kind of living my dream, retired, don't have to worry about work and all that. You could just sit and think and do philosophy and ideally one day in life, I want to be in a place where I could do the same thing. I mean, I was even joking around with my partner. All I really want to do is to get paid to think, to research, and to write. If I could do those three, I'd be the happiest
Yeah,
puppy in the world.
cool.
But Stephen, thank you so much again for your time. I'm really grateful for it.
It's been fun. I appreciate it. You have a good day. We'll see you later.